Hello and welcome to Talking China, the show where we talk to people with unique perspectives and unrivaled knowledge about the main talking points in China today. The two sessions is always a hotbed of talk about China's diplomacy, and this year has been no different. From China's role as a stabilizing force in the world to relations with the United States and the growing voice of the Global South. To discuss these issues and more, we're going to be talking to Professor Li Cheng, the founding director of the University of Hong Kong's Contemporary China and the World Center, Professor Liu Zhiqin, Senior Fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University, and our very own Li Cheng, CGTN reporter, who attended the Foreign Minister's press conference at the two sessions.
Hi everyone, I'm Li Cheng, a journalist with CGTN. It's the 6th year for me to cover the two sessions. I also visited many Global South countries, interviewed many scholars, politicians, key opinion leaders from these regions. So later in the conversation, I will try to bring those African, Asian, and Latin American voices in the debate.
Thanks, Jingjing. So let's kick things off with debate topic 1. Is China trying to change the international order? China's fundamental diplomatic approach may seem like common sense to many people, trying to give all countries an equal voice, being against war, conflict, in favor of peace and negotiation, supporting developing countries. But there's still a lot of confusion and, in some places, a little cynicism about the true intent of China's diplomacy. We've got an article from the Washington Post here that argues that China is seeking to create a multipolar world, offering an alternative order to one led by the United States, with a headline saying that China is pushing to build a new world order. Now, it's fair to say that China and the US have very different views about how the world should be run. But while China has been a vocal advocate of what it calls true multilateralism and against hegemonism, is it really true, Professor Li, that China wants a multipolar world, and what does it think it can get out of it?
Well, of course, that China constantly emphasizes multipolarity and multilateralism. Now, to answer your question, is China going to change the international order? Well, first, ironically, the so-called liberal international order collapsed in recent years, and especially the recent weeks, particularly evident in the United States and also in Europe. This is not caused by China, probably rather caused by the United States and its relation with, in terms of cross transatlantic relations. Now, if international order, you refer to UN-led rule-based order, no, China does not want to change it. China, just like some other countries, emphasize that the importance of the UN at this critical moment in world history. Now, if you also ask if it's the globalization, I think China is the country really have a strong support for economic globalization, because China benefit along with some other countries about the economic globalization. Now, but if you ask that if the order is what President Trump favored, like American first and or unilateralism, of course China has reservation. Now, if the order referred to President Biden's two blocks, namely authoritarianism versus democracy, certainly China reject that narrative. So it depends on you what you refer to as the international order. But most importantly, I think we are in a very critical moment in history. The so-called US-led liberal order basically already collapsed. Again, it's not caused by China. And of course, in a way, China's arguments to reform international order, not to completely replace one, now it's stronger and clearer than ever before.
Thank you, Professor Li. Professor Liu, so what does China think it can get out of a multipolar world? Why does China want a multipolar world?
That's an interesting question, but my answer is quite simple. I should say this is a question between demand and the supply side, whether the demand in the global community need to change the global order. If there is a necessity to change it, I think there's a supply side. So this is a really very important thing. So similar as Professor Li already mentioned here, that always we're trying to talk about the order at the moment. But do we think there's a necessity to change today's order? And who can be responsible to take this responsible or the function to make the global order in a different way. So if we can answer this fundamental question, I think the answer is clear. In my opinion, I think that China, has never tried to change the global order at the present, but it's decided by something else. For instance, if the Western countries made the order in a different way, unilateral, hegemonist, or some bullying the action taken. So if we follow this order, I think, including China, all over the world is willing to change it. So, but I want to say that China is not going or is not trying to change the global order at the present. We just try to modify, to improve the present order. Because at the moment we have already UN and also other international organizations that the government make the world governance. So in principle, they are quite welcomed by the world. But in some aspects, especially in the economic and geopolitical tension, something that always disordered by United States and by some NATO, or for instance, by some major European countries. For under such circumstances, there is a necessity and a demand from the market that such order should be changed, should be modified. So this is no doubt it is a good question, but who should take this responsibility? I don't think China will take this responsibility. China is only one part of the globalization. China is willing to help the rest of the world to make the world modified with diversified and with more opportunities to develop their own economy. So I think the question is quite simple to be cleared with all the backgrounds.
Xinjiang, do you think that there's an argument that perhaps China is strengthening its existing positions, but America is moving away from its previous commitments, which is opening up a new opportunity and a new position? Based on your conversations with people in the global south and your travels, what do they say? How do they feel about the US role at the moment and China's role?
I think first, I don't know who asked those questions, but to those who asked this question, I think we need to ask, what kind of order are they referring to in this question? Because sometimes the US politicians saying the rule-based international order, which is basically a few countries use their power to dominate the majority of the world. But I don't think China is trying to change the world order. China is trying to, calling everybody, let's go back to the world order that we all agreed on, that was based on UN Charter. All the countries agreed on after World War II, because I think in the past few years we saw some countries are abusing their powers, even neglecting the UN, and follow their own rule-based international order, which is basically exploiting the majority of countries, global south countries. So if that's the order they refer to, not just China wants to change that, the whole global south wants to change that because they know it's unfair. It's basically pushing the global south people down at the bottom of the trap. So, but in terms of the world order that we all agreed on after World War II, which is based on UN Charter, that's the thing that China has always been following, and China is not trying to change that. And actually during the two sessions, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi mentioned that if every country only thinks that only achieve their own interests, put their own interests first, then we go back to the rule of jungle. Might does not equal right. So that's my thought on it.
Thank you, Jingjing. What I would like to ask the two professors is that this sounds great. It's something we can all really agree on, the basis of a kind of equality for all countries, everyone having an equal voice, a stronger voice for smaller countries, support for developing nations. But is it realistic in a world where the US is becoming more isolationist, Western Europe is a little bit confused at the moment about its role? Is this multipolar world where we're going to see greater equality really something that we're going to see in reality? Professor Li?
Well, still yet to see. We are in a rapid change with a lot of uncertainty and confusion. And for example, Jingjing mentioned about the Western countries, including the United States and Europe, constantly talk about rule-based order, but only until the end of Biden administration. I mean, if you look at the recent narrative after Trump and after Munich Security Conference, when Vice President Vance delivered that very harsh criticism of Europe, and the point that the fact that European countries become like problems rather than the allies. So the whole thing is gone. So I think it's too early to answer a question about the multilateral kind of norm will prevail. But one thing is, I agree with Professor Liu that China now more than any time before emphasized global governance. I think the keyword governance previously is also frequently used by United States and Western country, but also now sounds like also that term also threw out the window. So again, we are in rapid change. Sometimes it's really astonishing to see how quickly U.S.-led ally now talk about the possible collapse of NATO, collapse of transatlantic relations. So I think that we should put in that perspective. But the fact is that it's not unipolar, not bipolar, not even three kind of kingdom Chinese tend to obsess, or some other country tend to obsess. But I think that we really enter the polar. There's more than three polars, and maybe four, maybe five, and or even more. So that's raised the issue about how to govern in this kind of the new situation, new economic, political, security landscape.
Yeah, I mean, there is an argument, maybe a bit of a stretch, that the US and China are on somewhat different roads, if going by different means and traveling in different ways with different intents. But we may end up in the kind of multipolar world we've been talking about by a kind of strange accident of the Trump return to the White House.